Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, the podcast that is dedicated to cold cases, missing persons, systemic injustices, and the art of forensic science that seeks answers when silence remains. My name is Asha Carmody, and I am a forensic scientist and a criminologist, and in each episode we examine the evidence, the systems, and the human stories that are often left behind. This isn't just about true crime, it's about truth. It's about accountability, and it's about giving a voice to those who deserve to be heard. Thank you so much for being here. Let's jump right in. Hi guys, welcome back. I hope you've had a beautiful week, and I've just done something that I'm trying not to do, which I've actually been trying actively not to do since I started speaking publicly. I guess it's a little bit public. I've done it again. I had a comment left on maybe Spotify, and it was like, please stop saying I get it. I am trying really hard not to do it. I challenge you to sit down and you speak about something for maybe half an hour. I've just done it again, and try not to say it. There are certainly programs and software that can remove that. However, because I'm starting to speak to other people and be a guest on other people's podcasts and speak publicly in front of people, I'm really trying to do it on my own, without any of the AI, without any of the technology. So please bear with me. I know I'm annoying, but like I said, you can skip through to the content that you want to hear. If you don't want to hear the housekeeping. Now, housekeeping, I have a couple of important things and then just a brief overview, so feel free to skip through if you like. If you haven't already listened to the guest episode of The Debrief, which is a part of Guilt Podcast by Ryan Wolf at Brevity Studios, please do so. I was a guest as a forensic specialist, and it was heaps of fun. They are a really lovely group of people, and since speaking to you last and telling you about this, he has also turned our chat into a YouTube video so you can see us having the conversation if you're more of a visual person. That's just, a little side piece for you. I know we've also got a few people who have come from Ryan's page from listening to that, so welcome to you as well, and welcome to all of our new people. We are growing by the day. I can't tell you how incredibly busy we've been with the not-for-profit setup side of things. It's very procedural and very difficult for someone who's used to working with animals. So it's a challenge. Now, really importantly, I have to say, we've done 2 episodes now on Luke Hazelwood, and in doing so, we had a close friend of Luke's help us with those, and I'm just incredibly grateful to this friend, and we've had a couple of other friends and kind of partners or ex-partners of Luke's help us out as well. I have to say and correct myself again, and I will always admit when I'm wrong and tell you and be entirely transparent because it's so incredibly important. I had a family member of Luke's reach out to me, which was incredible and very useful, obviously, for me to be able to give you guys the most accurate information. So to be honest with you, I was annoyed with myself. However, I was given alternate information. I know it happens, human error, but Luke does have aunties and uncles and cousins here in Perth. And it's really important for me to tell you that because I had told you otherwise in a couple of other episodes, because that's what we were under the impression with and working with. And I am going to be in touch with them to have a nice chat and see if we can assist them. And then we will do another episode on Luke in the future because we're working on a geographical heat map, which we like to use in missing persons searches. So I just had to put that one out there as well. We have a bit of a different episode for you today, but before we jump into that, I want to take a moment to check in and let you know what's been happening, because I know a lot of people send inquiries and things like that, and it might take me a moment to get back and I might seem unorganized. And while I admit I am slightly unorganized when it gets busy like this, things are definitely moving behind the scenes, and it's important for me and for you and for all the families that we help that we do have things going on behind the scenes, because they are procedural things and we want everybody to be protected, myself and everybody else included. So that's kind of what's taking a lot of time at the moment with the charity registration, setting up bank accounts for the not-for-profit and things like that. So a big part of my time has been obviously working on active missing persons cases and supporting families, and that's something that means a lot to me, and it's really at the heart of why Exhuming the Truth exists in the first place. But I've also just been refining what this space is becoming. Now, Exhuming the Truth, it as a podcast, but it is becoming something a lot bigger, and I've been looking at how I can expand into more structured support and advocacy and education for the not-for-profit, particularly for families navigating the justice system and for young people through the work I'm building with Exhuming the Truth Academy. You might have seen I've been asking for community input recently as well, asking kind of what services are missing and what people are struggling to access and what's too expensive or just not available at all, and like what your barriers are. And honestly, the responses have been really insightful. In some cases quite confronting, but that's what we want. We want to know what exactly is going on for people in this situation. There's obviously a clear gap in support. That's all I have to say about that. And it's something that I am actively working on changing. And I'm also continuing to develop some digital resources that will be coming soon. I'm excited to share that. But in terms of content, I'm still super committed to bringing you your podcast episodes and balancing case focus episodes with some of these broader conversations like today around justice and systems and things that we're going to jump into today. And the wider space, there's been a lot going on in the universe right now. So I hope everybody has been able to take some time for themselves, whether that be, like a nice hot bath or a walk or, time with animals, whatever you need to recharge. Make sure you are stepping away from technology here and there. I know it's a bit stupid that I'm saying that via technology, but it is super important to step away from it. I like to do that, hanging out with my kids and my horses and my dogs and my husband and playing music. So whatever makes you happy, make sure you're adding a little bit of that in there as well. So let's get into today. This episode is a bit different. I will admit I was going to actually do an episode on Ben Roberts-Smith because that is currently basically everywhere in the news right now, and it is costing the Australian taxpayers $300 million for this, which is absolutely ridiculous. But I thought, given the current circumstances, I might hold off a little bit and put a bit more thought and effort into it, but also hold off a little bit because the Australian justice system isn't super lenient with having conversations around active investigations, and that led me to today's episode I have created for you. It is called, and it sounds a bit dumb, but this is why you can watch trials in the US but not in Australia. This is something that I think about often. I think about it daily. My favorite go-to, I'm turning the TV on and I'm putting something on, is Court TV. Straight onto YouTube, Court TV, my fave. I will follow a trial from beginning to end. I feel like I learn a lot from that in regards to systematic things, justice things, forensics, all of it. And I follow a case from beginning to end. And I always like to try and make sure I'm watching the verdict live. And that's kind of just like a little bit of a weird thing about me. However, it does bring up the topic of why can't we watch cases like this in Australia? And not everyday cases, not a civil case. I'm talking criminal proceedings. And I'm going to talk about why we can't do that, the difference between America and Australia in regards to criminal proceedings and how we view justice overall. And I'd love to know what your opinion is on this. Do you think we should be able to watch criminal proceedings in Australia? Or do you think USA has got it wrong? Now, I know USA is actually in our top 5 listeners, so hello USA listeners, and I'm super interested to hear your input as well because we're talking about you here, you're on the stage, and we get to see the accused and the witnesses and all of the evidence piece by piece, photos, videos, you have it. Australia, you cannot. And you might read about it, in the news in Australia, and you might get little snippets of the review at the end of the day, but you're not going to see what actually happens inside that courtroom. So today, let's talk about that. And at the end, I'm going to ask you again, which system actually delivers better justice? Cameras in the courtroom. Let's start with the most obvious difference, which is visibility, of course. So in the USA, many of the courtrooms actually allow external cameras. So they've got their cameras set up and then they have external cameras. Now, I want to say not all courts in USA and not in every case, but enough trials can become public spectacles. So enough for court TV to be a channel, basically, which is quite a lot. And entire networks over there are dedicated to this. And they basically have a trial and they live stream them. And then clips from those then go viral. You might remember the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case. I watched that from beginning to end live in real time, and I was exhausted after, I think it was a month, but it was very entertaining, I might add, and I still see clips from that to this day. So some people are watching this, like me, in real time, and on one hand, that feels like transparency, right? But that's because justice isn't hidden. It's in front of us, and it's not behind closed doors, and it's something that me and you, the public, can witness. But here in Australia, the approach is obviously very different. Now, we do not allow cameras in courtrooms. They're actually prohibited in courtrooms, and that's not because the system is trying to hide something, or so they say. It's actually the opposite. It's very secretive, and it's something that the system is trying to protect. And they think here in Australia that by prohibiting cameras in the courtroom, it's actually allowing fairness, because once you introduce a camera, you don't just introduce transparency, you introduce performance. Now, in Australia, their argument basically is that the lawyers might start playing to the public, and witnesses might feel exposed or intimidated, and jurors, who are supposed to be completely impartial, can be influenced, even unintentionally, because obviously when you're a juror, you're not allowed access to your phone or the media. But they're saying, the case might be portrayed but one way outside the courtroom, and it might, sway their view. So Australia takes a really controlled approach, like incredibly controlled. I would have loved to watch the mushroom murder trial. That would have been great. I know right now Samantha Murphy in Ballarat, who is a missing woman, her trial is happening or about to happen. So obviously you still get reporting, but it's very filtered reporting and it's summarised, and it's bound very much by super strict legal rules. I find Australia very strict, but also very lenient. Like I find that, saying you can't come in the courtroom, you can't have cameras, the public can't know, blah, 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 very strict. But when it comes to sentencing, life imprisonment is 25 years, but, with parole that's earlier than 25 years. Whose life? Like in what world is a life sentence 25 years? Anyway, we'll get to my opinion later. Anyway, so this creates a really interesting tension in Australia, because it makes us ask the question, do we trust the public in Australia with full access, or do we protect the process even if it means limiting what people can see? I have a strong opinion on this, and I'll give it later, but let's talk jury versus judge dynamics here, because how decisions are actually made, it differs in both countries, because the juries obviously play a role in criminal proceedings, but the way that they function feels really, really different. Now, in the US, they have jury trials that are very, very common, and they are often very central to the identity of the justice system. They rely heavily on jury trials, and the jury does determine if somebody is guilty or not guilty, and in some cases, and more so than not in really serious cases, they can even influence the sentencing. There's also a cultural element in there, because the trial it can feel, I was going to say it feels theatrical, but it can feel. I have watched a few trials where I've been like, wow, this is like such not a performance, but almost, do you know what I mean? But some of them aren't, but they do have highly persuasive arguments. And in that, I feel like it does make them up the pressure and up their arguments. There's more emotional appeals, in my opinion, but moments that are just designed to resonate, not legally, but also emotionally, because at the end of the day, it's impossible not to include your emotions in their sentencing. And in Australia, we use juries for serious criminal matters, but the system feels a lot more restraint, because the judge plays a stronger, more controlling role here, and there's stricter rules around what can be said and what can be shown and how information is presented, and sentencing is always decided by the judge, not the jury. So the jury might come forward and say, yes, it's a unanimous guilty verdict. And then the judge will accept that, and then the judge will impose how long that person serves, if they serve at all. So while both the systems are obviously aiming for fairness, the style of justice is very, very different. And one is more visible, obviously, and more emotive, which is USA, and it's very public-facing. But Australia is definitely more contained and arguably more insulated, I guess, from outside influence. Let's talk sentencing differences, because this is a question I get a lot when people are talking to me about sentencing in Australia. What's life? What's the max for this? What's the max for that? And in America, it's obviously very different, because this is where things really start to diverge when we're talking about comparing the two countries, because when we're talking about justice, we're often really talking about punishment. Now, in the US, their sentencing, some would describe it as harsh. I would not personally, but anyway, some people would say US has a harsh, it's definitely harsher than Australia. Let's put it that way. So you've got things like mandatory minimum sentences, which I think are great. You've got the 3-strike laws, and in some states, they obviously still carry the death penalty. Now, it's not uncommon to see sentences that total 100 years or more in America, and the philosophy behind that system often leans toward punishment and deterrence. And basically, the concept is, if the consequences are severe enough, then people will be less likely to commit crimes. And I agree with that. If you're going to get, 100 years, you're probably going to think that over more than getting 25 years. Do you know what I mean? In Australia, our approach is very different. We don't have the death penalty, obviously. Our sentencing is actually guided by principles like proportionality, rehabilitation, and the individual circumstances of the offender. And that doesn't mean sentences are soft or anything like that, but I would argue with that, how to say the right thing. It doesn't mean it's soft, but a lot of our sentences are soft. And obviously I have to preface that every sentence is very circumstantial. I do not like to discriminate in that way. There are a lot of co-contributing factors in each and every criminal case that we see, that might mean rehabilitation is more necessary inside somebody's sentence, or, having a minimum sentence is more appropriate in another situation. So we have to always be super mindful of that. But there's generally more emphasis on balancing punishment with the possibility of rehabilitation in Australia. And that's wild to me, because being in Australia and having knowledge of how the prison systems operate in this country, there is not enough, in my opinion, rehabilitation services within incarceration. But this is where it gets super complex, because it does depend on your perspective, and you might see one system as being too harsh and the other as being not harsh enough, but both are trying to answer the same question, which is, what does justice actually look like? And before I do get into my reasons for the way I feel about this, we'll talk about media influence and the public perception. But I have to say, I'm always super open to discussion and to changing my mind. I am absolutely a person who can have firm beliefs on one thing and have one conversation with another person and completely change my mind. I love having my mind changed, so I'm not opposed to any type of controversial-ish conversation. I just know from personal experience and professional experience, this is kind of how I've based my observations and how I feel about it. But we can't talk about any of this without talking about the media, of course. And because obviously the moment you allow cameras into a courtroom, you're not creating just access, you create narrative, okay? And we know how the media like to operate. They'll pick little bits and they run with that, and that with no context, and the whole thing's blown out of proportion. It actually ruins people's lives. And a really clear example of this is Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. This was obviously a legal proceeding, but it was a global spectacle. Everyone was watching it, if not reading about it. And when people were watching, they're not just watching, they're analysing, they're reacting, they're choosing sides. I absolutely did. I knew whose side I was on from the beginning because I had done adequate research on it. And that didn't change, actually, throughout the course of the proceedings. Now, social media obviously explodes with commentary as always, memes and opinions and things like that. And whether we like it or not, it does shape perception, and it shapes how people interpret evidence and who they believe, and even how justice is remembered. And in Australia, that level of exposure is obviously a lot less likely because we don't allow the cameras into a courtroom, but it can actually feel frustrating, especially for people who want transparency. And it also means that the case is less likely to be tried in the court of public opinion. I've done a little bit of a pros and cons for each that you might be thinking of right now if we break it down. And this is simply in regards to televised trials. So the US system, obviously, it benefits from being transparent and public, and education and accountability. It certainly holds everybody accountable. I would say maybe some downfalls would be the trial becoming entertainment, or witnesses, being put on the spot and feeling unsafe. Those are the two big downfalls to that, I guess, that I came up with. And in regards to Australia, I would say the positives are kind of the opposite. Like, it is reducing the external pressure and it's protecting the trial's integrity. But I would say the downfall is it's not transparent, and then the public are creating their own narrative anyway out of the media summaries. So, yeah, and people can feel disconnected from the process. And I think in important cases that are criminal, I think transparency is key, because there's people in the community that have got to live there. They've got to know, they have a right to know what's going on. So let me just have my little memento of what I think about this, because I do think USA are doing better than us. I do. Obviously, they have more people, which means they've got more crime. They've got obviously a bigger geographical area in their country. So that, they're per capita, they've got more people, it's going to be more crime, things like that. People might say they've got more serious crime than us. I'd say the only difference is they have guns, more guns. So, they're allowed to have guns, I should say. So that would contribute in that way. But aside from that, we have a lot of murder. We have a lot of crime in Australia. People just are ignorant to it because not every murder, homicide, manslaughter, not all of it is in the news, guys. Sexual assault, attempted murder, there is so much. We have a long way to go. And I think 25 years for life, life in prison in Australia for committing murder, and that means intentionally planning on ending someone's life and then following through and doing so, you only get 25 years. But also, if you get parole, you're out earlier than that. What is that? That's not 25 is not life. If a loved one of mine was killed and lost their life and the killer got 25 years, I'd be fuming. I just don't think it's acceptable. It's the same as our sexual assault. I think is it sexual assault or don't quote me. It's either sexual assault max charge or sex assault against a minor max charge. One of the two. The max sentence is 15 years. What the fuck, guys? What the fuck? That's not enough. That is not. These things are not accidental things. And I know I said that things are very circumstantial per case, and they are. But murder is killing somebody and willingly ending their life with the intent to do so and then carrying that out. That's a premeditated act. Sexual assault, you don't accidentally kill someone. You don't accidentally sexually assault someone. You don't accidentally harm a child. These are things that are very serious. And I think USA, their sentencing reflects that, how serious it is. And it says to other people, don't do this, or this will be you. You will end up here. And then in terms of having cameras in the courtroom, I think we should. Sorry, but I think if maybe if we could have extra protection for the witnesses who are involved, that'd be great. But I think, I do think that we should be able to be watching these trials live. I do think that we should be able to see that, this person is getting adequate representation, the victim's getting adequate representation, that everything is going how it should go, that it is a fair courtroom, that we can see that justice is being handed down, that we can see what evidence is being given. I think it's very important, actually. And I think we should do it. here in Australia, particularly, Samantha Murphy's case is out, and I completely sympathise with the family and the position that they're in. But I do think that the trial should be televised. Same with the I think all of these kind of anything that pertains to a sexual assault, abuse against a child in any shape or form, or murder or attempted murder should be televised. I do think. I think that at the very least it should be a transcript available, because it is community safety, it is crime prevention, it is education, it's so many things. And I know, I watch, like I said at the very start of this, I watch court TV to watch trials from beginning to end so I can learn. And I can stay up to date with, modern technology, modern forensics, modern law. And I find it important, and I sit here from beginning to end. It doesn't matter. I don't skip over anything. It goes for hours, and I sit there and I will watch it and listen. I think it's important. I've learned a lot over the years from watching it. So I'm interested to hear your opinion. I do think, obviously, vulnerable people should be protected in that situation, if possible. But that's just my opinion. And I do think that we have a soft justice system here in Australia. And I think that, oh my God, I could do episode after episode on our justice system. But if we're just comparing ours with America, I think they're doing better. I think that, life imprisonment should mean life imprisonment. Whether that means we need to have a whole overhaul, I guess, of our justice system, that's another thing. But I forgot to say also, this is the end of the episode and I'm going to love and leave you, but I forgot to say earlier, we did actually do an interview today with an ABC reporter. Now, I don't know if you have heard, in WA, there is a case called the Nannup 4. I'm familiar with it in the context where I know the story briefly and a bit of an outline of the story. I'm not too deep into it, but I'm going to look into it. It's been one that's been kind of at the back of my mind, but I've just been flat out. But I'm going to listen to that podcast. Now, funnily enough, I was going to download that podcast to listen to on my honeymoon, but I thought, no, don't do that. You're on honeymoon, try not to think about sort of work-related things, so I didn't. And then I had contact from the reporter from ABC who actually did that podcast, and she wanted to have a chat, and we did a filmed chat today for, I think she said they were putting together a show for missing people in Australia and families of missing people, and I guess their loved ones' missing case falling into their own lap. So I did have a little bit of a chat with her today, and we filmed that. So hopefully when that comes out, I'll be able to tell you. You can watch it and have a listen. And it's useful to you. I did try and represent the families as best as possible, and let people know sort of what goes into this line of work and trying to find missing people who have fallen under the radar. So that's another one that we've got coming up that you might be interested in. Anyway, I'm really also interested to have a chat with you about what you think about USA versus Australia. I was going to say versus Asha. USA versus Australia in terms of, sentencing. And I want to know, do you really think that we should be able to watch or live stream or what have you in major cases in our country like they do in America, and why or why not? Let me know. I'm really interested. I want someone to give it to me how you really feel about it. I want to know. Let's chat. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know we have the occasional systemic chat. Today is one of them. Felt like we needed it. And it's very relevant to things going on right now. Like I said earlier, there's a lot going on in the world right now, so take care of you first, and, take care of your mind. Today I went and took my children and my niece to see the Magic Faraway Tree, which was great, because the moral of the story is to not forget to have an imagination. So I encourage you to do that. Spend some time outside, wherever you are or however you need to take care of yourself and your mind. And as always, we're here to help at any time. Might take me a moment to get back to you, but I'm working on it. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed it. You can find us across basically all social media platforms. You can join our little group. It's called Exhuming the Truth Sleuth Society. It's on Facebook. You can join that at any time. And if you like my work, you can help me and support me by subscribing on Facebook for $1.49 per month. I was going to say all that money goes to me and the work that I'm doing. However, Facebook takes a cut. So most of it goes to me. The rest goes to Facebook. Basically, all the work I'm doing is unpaid so that we're able to freely help families who need us and make this work accessible. So thank you for being here. Stay safe. My name is Asha Carmody. This is Exhuming the Truth. Have a beautiful day.